comes to building your own track bar or panhard bar, there's a couple things that you need to know. The first thing is you need to understand what the track bar is actually doing. So if you did not have a track bar on your vehicle and you try to drive it, the axle is going to want to come from underneath the Jeep. If you've ever been on the trails and you've seen somebody break a hind joint or a track bar bracket, that axle, as the wheels are turning, is actually just going to start coming out from underneath the body, and the body will want to go another way. So it's important that you have a track bar, but it's also important that it's set up properly and that your axle is centered underneath the vehicle. What you don't want is your front axle not in line with the rear axle. You don't want the rear axle not in line with the front axle, so when you're going down the road, everything's in a straight line. When it comes to making the track bar bracket, you need to make sure you're starting off in the right spot. The first thing you need to know is where you're going to put your brackets at. That's probably the hardest spot, especially for the upper, because there's not a lot of room, especially if that bracket's hanging down very low and you have a truss and all that good stuff. When I started mine, I built everything off the steering up top. I mounted my steering box, then I mounted my pivot arm, which is a flat pivot arm, and then I did that to get more clearance between the tie rod, and then once I had the flat pivot arm, then I could then mount my upper bracket. When I mounted my upper bracket, I went off of where my hind joint was for my pivot arm. So I just stuck a hind joint on here because I don't have a drag link right now. Stuck a hind joint on there, bolted it on, and I found my center point of that hind joint. And all I did was pretty much draw an invisible line over, and I knew where my center point for my hind joint on my track bar needed to be. You want that as close to possible with being in line with the hind joint on the pivot arm. After that, I went ahead and just built my own track bar bracket, and I knew that was good. I had to cut my truss out a little bit, but not a big deal. On the other side, I have my high steer kit from Artec. I already have my tie rod mounted. My drag link's going to mount on top, so I know where my center point's at for that. Same thing, I just threw a hind joint in there, put a bolt in there, and then I found my center line, and I brought it over to where my track bar mount is on the axle. This side's pretty easy because there's no clearance issues. Again though, you just want to make sure that this center point for the hind joint is the center point, the same center point as what you have on your drag link. Once you have the brackets in place, you can then go ahead and start from this end and then measure to this end, and that's the first step that we're going to do. One thing I forgot to mention, when you're doing your mounts for your track bar, you not only want to make the mounts to where your track bar is going to be the same angle as the drag link, you also want to try to make it the same length. What I mean by that is, I went ahead, when I went to set my track bar brackets up, I put a hind joint on my pivot arm, and I put a hind joint at the lower mount on my knuckle for the drag link. I got a measurement. It came out to be like 39 inches is what the length is going to be for my drag link. Once I know that, I want to make the length from my lower bracket to my upper bracket for the track bar the same length. If you can do that, you're going to have the most perfect steering you can have. So if you did not, and say you run a really short track bar, for instance, let's just say my track bar bracket is mounted right here in the center of the axle, and the upper one's right here. When you're driving, that axle is going to want to move so much because your track bar bracket is going to be at a higher angle for one, and it's going to be a lot shorter. You want to make that, if you can make that fairly long, fairly flat, when you're driving and you're going up and down, that track bar is not going to have that much to move, or have more to move, so that axle is not going to want to be going side to side. If that axle is moving side to side too much, it's going to cause your drag link to move side to side too much. Therefore, it's going to cause your pivot arm to move, and your steering wheel is going to go like this, and you're kind of be all over the road. So that's called bump steer. So keep those as flat as possible, keep them the same angle, and keep them the same length, and you'll be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and get my measurements. I'm just going to go center to center. I'm not looking for anything perfect right now. I just need to know how long of a piece of DOM I need to cut. So I'm looking at about 39.5 center to center. I know I'm going to have to put a bend in this. It's going to come straight up, but once it gets to this truss, it's going to have to kind of go up and then kind of into the track bar bracket. So it's not going to be much of a bend, but it is going to be a little bit, so I'm going to cut a piece a little bit longer. And once I get that, I'll probably just kind of set it in here. I'll figure out where I need to start bending it at, and I'll take it over to my bender, I'll put a little bit of a bend in it, and then once I get that set, I'll just cut off one of the ends. So like I said, you just want to make it a little bit longer if you got to put a bend in it. If you got to do a straight track bar, it's very simple. You just cut a piece of tubing, throw your hinds on it, and you're pretty much done. So let's go ahead and cut a piece of tubing and then we'll start bending it. Alright, the materials I'm going to use to build my drag link is a piece of 1.5 by 1/4 inch wall DOM, 2 hind joints, and then 2 bungs. Left-handed threads, right-handed threads, and the reason being, when you have this on the Jeep, you're going to be able to just turn this rather than taking it off. And that goes the same for your tie rod, your 4 links, 3 links. You should always do 1 left-handed thread, always 1 right-handed thread, so you can adjust that without taking it off your vehicle. Important note, when installing hind joints, you want to make sure you get good thread engagement. I think the rule of thumb is to take the width of the hind joint threads itself, times that by like 1.5. So this is like a 3/4 inch hind shaft. So you times that by 1.5. Let's just go about 1 1/4-ish, somewhere around there. What you don't want to do is have about a 1/2 inch thread engagement and then you have all this thread showing. That's not going to be very strong. And as long as your measurements are pretty close, you shouldn't need that much adjustment. What I've been doing on mine is using about a 1/2 inch, and that way if you got to tweak it just a little bit, you can.
Let's go.
Next thing we want to do now that we got this cut to size is we want to do a bevel around there, kind of like a 45-degree angle. That way when I put the bung in there, you'll have a nice V to lay your weld dot in. Alright, so we got our taper done. Like I said, now I'm going to put this bung in here. And now you got that V to lay your weld down in. So you're going to get a lot of penetration and then the weld's going to contact a lot more of the metal. The next thing we want to do is drill a hole for a rosette weld or a plug weld, whatever you want to call it. This is very crucial to get in the right spot. So the easiest way is to measure your bung from the end to where it meets up with the V. So I think that's like 3/4. I'm going to stick that in there and then I'm going to measure from the middle of this V 3/4, and let's just say it's about right there. I want to go to the center of that, so maybe about right there. What you don't want to do is drill too far to the back, because then you're not going to be able to weld it, because all your weld's going to go in there, and then you're not going to be able to get your hind joint in there. And you also don't want to bring it to the edge, because then you're not really getting anything on the tube itself. So the whole purpose of this is more or less kind of like a backup, I guess, of your weld, if you want to call it that, to where if this weld would fail, you have this rosette weld, which I'll show you. I'm just going to drill a hole, just like that, and then I'm going to actually fill that in. So when I go to fill it in, I'm going to weld to the bung, and then I'm just going to kind of bring it out, and then it's going to come out around the tube, and that's just another kind of safe feature for this bung to make sure it stays in there. So I like to use a step bit, and the only reason is because as it's drilling, it's kind of making more of a tapered hole, and I just find that it's easier when you're doing the rosette weld and you're starting at the bottom. As you get bigger, the hole's going to get bigger towards the top. It's just a little easier to move that weld around. So when you go to weld this, there's a few different ways to do it. The first thing is you can put some like tip dope in there, and you kind of still want to keep this at an angle, just kind of keep the splatter from going inside here, because if you get one little splatter on one of them threads, then you're going to have to run a tap through it probably, unless it just breaks off real easy. The other option is you can run a hind joint in there. If you got an old hind, just throw it in there because you're going to get weld splatter all over the hind. You don't want to do it with a good hind joint. Put that in there, and then when it cools, you should be able to move it out. The other option, which is the option that I do, have done on all my control arms and everything, and it's worked out great. I get the trac wet, stick it in there, and just weld away. And I've done it multiple ways. I've welded this in thirds where it cools between each setting, and then I welded it complete, all of it, did the rosette welds and welded all the way around. I like to put a little bit of fluid film just down inside. Alright, so our trac bar is complete. Now once you install it, it's a good idea to double check your center. You might have to make some small adjustments. To check your center, obviously you should be using a plumb bob. And then I went ahead and just did a right side tuck and a left side tuck just to make sure everything is okay. Thanks for watching. Any questions or comments, let me know.